say the dead don't whisper. But on the Kansas prairie in 1878, the dead screamed not with mouths, but through fevered winds, unopened eyes, and the flesh that refused to rot. You were never meant to hear this story. The men who recorded it vanished. The records were sealed in lead-lined boxes, buried beneath floorboards, burned from church registries, and struck from state archives. But some stories rot too slowly to forget. This is one of them. In the long and blood-soaked ledger of America's frontier history, Cedar Ridge was meant to be a footnote, a nameless dot on a map, just miles from the Oklahoma border. But beneath its soil under wheat fields and limestone foundations, something older stirred, something unrecorded. And when the fever came, it didn't bring death, not first. It brought awakening. It began with 4 brothers, the Blackwoods. You've heard their names, in whispers: Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel. Farmers by trade, God-fearing men, or so they appeared. But what God they served, by the end, no pulpit could name. The people of Cedar Ridge saw them as reclusive, but righteous, unshakable in faith, immune to temptation, disease, and eventually, even decay. You see, while typhoid turned mothers to bone and daughters to waxen husks, the Blackwoods remained untouched. Not by luck, not by medicine, but by transformation. Something entered them or awoke within them as others perished. Their bodies hardened, their eyes changed, their voices began to sound like chords, not speech, harmony, like organs echoing through marrow. And that was only the beginning. Doctors refused to record what they saw in the final days. Even Dr. Samuel Morrison, who delivered half the county's children, collapsed at his desk, trying to describe what Ezra had become. His notes ended with 7 scrawled words: "We are no longer the dominant species." What followed was suppression, institutional, coordinated, vicious. The Kansas State Medical Board sealed the files. The Methodist Church erased baptismal records. Witnesses were warned. Some disappeared. One child drew what she saw on the chapel hill, in chalk. Her mother beat her, bloody, and burned the porch boards to erase it. This is not about faith versus science. It's about what happens when both surrender to something older, something beneath. And now, after 147 years, we're going to uncover it one forbidden piece at a time. Stay with me. The land doesn't forget, not truly. It stores memory, not in words, but in bone, in the way the grass dies differently near certain stones, in how animals won't graze past invisible borders. And in Cedar Ridge, Kansas, the land had started to remember something the settlers never knew to fear. After the fever took its first victims, the community clung to the only salvation it had ever known: no order rules, prayers. But disease has no God, and death needs no permission. Families died in strange patterns. Entire homes were left untouched while others were emptied overnight. Water was blamed, then air, then sign. But no one dared ask why the Blackwoods remained untouched, immune, clean, almost too clean. It wasn't just that they survived, it was how they changed. Ezra, the eldest, stopped speaking altogether for 9 days. When he finally did, it was in a dialect no one recognized. Caleb's handwriting, once tight and measured, became spirals, symmetrical, obsessive. The ink on his ledger book sank through 3 pages, as if written under pressure no human hand could exert. Josiah began carving symbols into the chapel walls, deeper than any chisel should have reached. They pulsed in moonlight. Witnesses said the limestone bled sap like living wood. But Abel, Abel changed the most. He was always the flame among stone, the zealot, the prophet. But in August of 1878, he stopped eating entirely. Not from fasting, from something else. "I no longer need the flesh of this world," he told a neighbor once, smiling in a way that made grown men look away. and his skin, already pale, began to glow under starlight, faint but constant. He didn't sweat, he didn't blink, and his prayers turned violent. The chapel became something else, a structure outside time. Locals who approached it just to deliver food or seek help reported distortions, sounds like whispers through water, birds falling dead mid-flight above the roof. One boy swore the windows showed night on the east wall and sunrise on the west at noon, but no one dared intervene. Fear had strangled reason. The brothers were becoming something else, something ancient, and yet no one in power came, no state health official, no bishop, no marshal. As if the plague had become a veil, keeping eyes turned away from what was truly happening on the Blackwood farm, or worse, as if the silence had been purchased. Because if you listen carefully, beneath the creaking floors of the old Blackwood house, if it still stood, you might still hear them, not the brothers, but what they became, the night of August 17th, 1878. The sky refused to darken. It hung above Cedar Ridge in a hue no one could name, neither blue nor black, but something between, bruise and ash. A sickly twilight that lingered long past sunset. Those who were still alive that week described the air as tasting like pennies, and the wind as whispering not through trees, but through walls, and every house, every window, seemed to tilt, ever so slightly, toward the Blackwood Chapel. That's when the dreams began. Not dreams, exactly visitations. Men with calloused hands and women with prayer-worn knees began waking up at exactly 3:13 a.m., gasping, drenched in sweat, with the same memory. 4 shadowy figures standing at the edge of a golden wheat field, their faces hidden, their mouths open wide, but making no sound. In each dream, the figures would lift their hands in unison, revealing palms cut with identical symbols. Then they would point toward the dreamer's chest, and the dreamer would awaken with a pain in their sternum, like they'd been struck with a branding iron dot. Within a week, 12 more residents had died, but not from fever, from fear, heart attacks, strokes. One man walked straight into his barn's thresher without blinking. The town tried to explain it: grief, dehydration, madness, but deep down, they knew. Something was radiating out from the Blackwood property. A pulse, a signal, a calling. And it wasn't finished. Dr. Morrison, who had begun keeping 2 journals, one for the town records, and one hidden beneath the floorboards of his study, recorded a disturbing detail. On the night of August 17th, he visited the Blackwood farm. Compelled by what he described as a voice in the wind, not loud, but personal, he found the brothers kneeling in front of the chapel. All 4, side by side, their shirts removed, their skin glistening not with sweat but a thin, translucent film that shimmered like oil on water. They were chanting, but the words weren't English, weren't Latin, and didn't follow the pattern of any known language. Morrison said the sound hit the body more than the ears, like vibrations in the gut, like something ancient crawling out from the soil beneath your feet. He fled, ran until his lungs bled, burned his boots in the fireplace when he returned, and the next morning his front yard was filled with crows. Dead ones, all of them facing east, as if waiting for something or someone. The cornfields didn't rustle anymore. By late August, even the wind seemed afraid of the Blackwood land. A dead calm had settled over Cedar Ridge, one that made the crickets fall silent, the dogs stop barking, and the air itself hold its breath. And in that silence, a sound began to emerge. Soft at first, like humming beneath the ground, rhythmic, mechanical, but organic. The town blacksmith described it best, like bones grinding in harmony. It came every night now, always between 2 and 4 a.m., traveling underground from the chapel out into the fields. Horses refused to cross certain lines. One farmer's oxen broke through their yoke and drowned themselves in a creek. A woman miscarried twins the moment the hum began. And always the Blackwood brothers were seen standing outside, barefoot, eyes closed, hands raised to the sky, as if welcoming something back. Dr. Morrison's hidden journal grew more frantic. His handwriting deteriorated with each entry. He stopped naming the Blackwoods as individuals, referring to them only as the Four. He claimed he'd begun hearing their voices in his dreams, not speaking to him, through him, as if they were using his own thoughts to transmit messages he didn't understand. Numbers, equations, anatomical diagrams drawn in reverse, musical notations paired with Hebrew scripture. One entry was scrawled in red ink, likely blood. They're not being changed, they are being restored. What did that mean? It meant that whatever had been awakened in them wasn't new. It was old, older than Kansas, older than the Bible, and it was not coming from above. It was rising from below. That same week, 3 young boys snuck onto the Blackwood property at dusk, daring each other to peek through the chapel windows. What they saw broke them. One never spoke again. Another began screaming in Latin every time he looked at a cross. The third died in his sleep, his face contorted in terror, mouth locked open, hands clutched to his chest like he'd been trying to claw something out. Their parents begged the church for answers, but the Methodist preacher had already left town. No notice, no sermon, just a note nailed to the church door that read, "God has departed from this place." And by then, the shadows on the Blackwood property had started, moving in directions the sun didn't allow. Something had crossed over, and it hadn't come alone. The sun stopped rising the same way. To the rest of Kansas, dawn still came like a soft golden tide across the wheat, but near the Blackwood land, morning arrived differently, skewed, distorted. The light would bend in strange angles across the horizon, casting elongated shadows of trees that no longer stood, and illuminating parts of the sky that hadn't yet turned from night. One farmer claimed he saw the sun rise twice in the same hour, once in the east, and again from the north. But by then, most had stopped watching the sky altogether. They were watching the hill, the chapel. It had begun to change, not visibly, not structurally. No boards were added, no stones removed, but anyone who approached it said it felt different. Larger on the inside than it should have been. Colder in rooms with no windows. One man, hired to deliver feed to the Blackwoods livestock, swore he walked past the same window 3 times without turning. Another swore the crucifix on the eastern wall blinked, and from within its stone walls, at night, came sounds, not voices, not chants, machinery. Turning gears, clicking valves, like some immense living engine pulsing through limestone and walnut pews. Josiah, the scholar among the brothers, had begun referring to their chapel not as a church but as a vessel, and not for worship but for transmission. Transmission of what? That was the question Dr. Morrison scrawled in his journal the day before he disappeared. His last entry was simple, just for words. They are not alone. The next morning, his house was empty. No signs of struggle, no packed bags. But every mirror in the home, every reflective surface had been smashed. His cat, still alive, had gouged out both its eyes. His basement door was sealed shut from the inside, and beneath it, that same pulsing hum. The town began to fracture. Some blamed demons. Others believed the Blackwoods had uncovered a new science, something the government wanted silenced. But the oldest among them, the ones with memories of Eastern European villages and old country folk tales, began whispering something else. A name. Not in English. Not in Latin. A word so old it didn't belong in any written language. The translation. Those who remember the first fire. And they believed the Blackwood brothers weren't serving that fire. They were becoming it. August 23rd, 1878. That was the last day Cedar Ridge recorded a sunrise that followed the natural laws of Earth. The town's school teacher, Margaret Ellery, had begun documenting the phenomenon. She kept a log of sun position, temperature, and bird activity every morning for her students' weather studies. but her notes after the 23rd broke from science and spiraled into madness. She wrote of a sun that paused, a dawn that stuttered in place like a flame against glass. She wrote that the roosters crowed in reverse, and then she stopped writing altogether. Her house was found unlocked, her spectacles still on the desk, ink fresh in the bottle. But Margaret was gone. The only clue was a single word, carved into her wall, repeatedly. Thousands of times deep gouges layered over one another, until the wood split and bled sap, witness. It was the same word later found inside the chapel, etched beneath the altar, carved backward. The Blackwoods had stopped speaking to anyone by then, not out of secrecy, but necessity. Locals who engaged with them claimed they no longer spoke with mouths. The words entered your head. One man claimed, like they were thoughts you didn't ask for. Another described it as being prayed into, like something reaching into your soul with hands made of scripture and fire. One young man, Jacob Prentice, a hired hand, returned from a week working their fields. Different. He could no longer tolerate natural light. His skin broke into blisters at dawn. His eyes were bloodless. He began drawing spirals on his arms and chest, saying they were maps. When pressed, he would only say, "They showed me the vein beneath the world." Then, on the 26th, the cattle screamed, not bellowed. Screamed. Every cow on the Blackwood land, over 200 head, began wailing at the exact same second, a piercing human-like shriek that echoed for miles. Witnesses said it sounded like birth. Others said it sounded like execution. But when townspeople rushed to investigate, they found the herd perfectly consistent, grazing, no sign they had ever made a sound, except for the fact that every single one now had an identical mark burned into their foreheads. Not with fire, with light, a perfect circle, inside which was a symbol no one recognized. No one, except Josiah. He had drawn it once, long ago, in the margins of a book. No one else was allowed to read. A book bound in hide, too smooth to be leather, too pale to be animal. It was not a sigil, it was a seal, and now it had been broken. The seal had not been meant for men to break. It was older than scripture, older than soil something whispered into the bones of the earth long before language was born. And now, in Cedar Ridge, Kansas, it had been torn open by the faithful. The Blackwood brothers hadn't summoned anything. No, that would imply intention. They had been selected, or perhaps remembered by something that had waited, buried in time, for vessels strong enough to carry it forward, and their piety, their purity, their isolation had made them ideal. The chapel had become its mouth. That night, the 27th, the dream spread beyond Cedar Ridge, 10 miles west. In Burroughs Township, a cattle driver ran his wagon into a ravine after waking to find his horses weeping, not braying, weeping. Their eyes were leaking clear fluid, their bodies convulsing, as if rejecting something that had entered them from within. The driver himself claimed he had seen men of smoke with blue eyes standing in the trees, humming, in four-part harmony. And then came the light. Over the Blackwood property, an aurora bloomed, pulsing, circular, silent, not like northern lights. This was structured, intelligent. It moved in spirals across the sky, matching the carvings found on Caleb's ledgers. The patterns repeated every 47 seconds. Mathematicians who later studied those drawings found prime sequences, DNA helixes, in constellations that shouldn't have been visible from Kansas or Earth. That night, something emerged from the chapel, a shape, humanoid but taller, fluid, veiled in refracted light. It walked the wheat like wind, bending every stalk it passed without touching them. The only man to see it directly alive, Granger, a Civil War veteran, gouged out his own eyes with a crucifix before the sheriff could restrain him. When asked what he saw, Elias muttered one phrase over and over, spitting teeth as he did: "We are their harvest, not prey, not sacrifices. Harvest, because what lives beneath doesn't take without planting first." And the Blackwood brothers, They weren't the planters, they were the soil, and in them, something had grown. It had roots, it had memory, and now it had opened its eyes. August 28th, 1878, the day the town clock tower cracked straight down the middle despite no storm, no quake, no impact, just a tona, single frequency that rang out across Cedar Ridge. At exactly 3:33 a.m., it wasn't heard through ears. It was felt in teeth, in bones, in the delicate membranes between dreams and waking. Every man who heard it vomited blood. Every child who heard it screamed for their mothers, in voices that didn't sound like their own. And every animal that heard it stopped moving altogether and turned to face the chapel, because something had shifted. The harvest wasn't coming. It had already begun. That morning, 12 men rode out to the Blackwood property, not with torches and fury, but with trembling hands and the half-hope of salvation. They brought Bibles, crosses, guns. They never made it inside. Witnesses from the tree line said the men stopped 50 feet from the chapel and stood frozen, heads tilted like dogs hearing a sound too high for human ears. Then, one by one, each man raised his arms like a preacher at altar call, eyes rolled white, mouths muttering syllables no living language claims, hand collapsed. No wounds, no burns, no trauma. But when their bodies were examined, their hearts had inverted, turned inside out. The coroner called it an act of God. But the oldest woman in town, who hadn't spoken in over a year, whispered one word when she saw the corpses: reversal. And she wasn't just speaking of flesh, because everything in Cedar Ridge was unraveling. The wheat fields had begun growing, backward roots rising above soil, stalks curling into themselves like withering scrolls. Water ran uphill, shadows stretched toward the sun. Time itself began to falter. One man swore he relived the same hour twice, down to the flies on the wall and the cough in his throat. The mayor's wife slit her own wrists during dinner, not out of fear, but because the voices told her she had already died 3 times before. And the chapel, it began humming again, louder, rhythmic, like a birth canal widening. Inside, the Blackwoods were no longer just men. They had become vessels not possessed, not infected, aligned with what? Not demons, not angels, but memory itself. A memory too ancient to bear light. A memory that had only ever spoken in fire and blood. And the pulsing tremor of creation's first scream, and it was awakening. Through them. Through us, through you. August 29th. The air over Cedar Ridge grew dense, not with fog, but with silence so thick it pressed against skin like oil. Birds no longer flew. Bugs vanished. Even the wind, once constant across the Kansas plains, retreated. It was as if the very elements had withdrawn to watch. Something happened by midday. No one dared go outside. The Blackwoods had not been seen for 72 hours, but their chapel glowed, not brightly, subtly, a pulse, like breath. The stone shimmered faintly beneath sunlight, rejecting dust and shadow. Inside, no sound escaped. Yet witnesses swore they could hear weeping from beneath the foundation. What childlike sobs from a voice that was not human, but trying to be. Dr. Morrison was gone. The mayor too. The town sheriff had hung himself by the church bell, roped the same one he rang every Sunday for 22 years. Etched into the soles of his boots were tiny spirals, so perfect they appeared burned with surgical precision. And in his pocket, a note. They don't need us to believe. They need us to remember. The town's elders met secretly that evening, the last gathering Cedar Ridge would ever record. They made one final decision. The chapel must be destroyed. Not with fire, it wouldn't burn. Not with guns, they wouldn't work. So they chose salt. 12 men. 12 sacks, of course, salt and lime. And one plan: to poison the land, to bleach the soil until nothing sacred or profane could take root again. But when they reached the chapel, it wasn't there. Not fully. The structure remained, but it had shifted. The windows now reflected stars that hadn't yet risen. The altar glowed softly from within, and the stone had begun to pulse almost, receding slightly with each heartbeat, as if the building was not built upon the land, but was emerging from it. And then, the doors opened, not swung, not creaked, opened by unseen force. With purpose. Inside stood the four brothers, but their eyes no longer saw. They radiated light. Like lanterns of blood and memory, their mouths moved, but no sound came. And yet, every man present heard the same words, carved into their minds with surgical clarity. We have remembered the first fire. Now you will too. And in that moment, time shattered. 3 men dropped dead. 2 fell to their knees, screaming ancient prayers they'd never learned. The rest fled, salt bags forgotten, leaving behind only boot prints and one silver cross that melted into the chapel floor like wax. August 30th, 1878. The last full day Cedar Ridge existed on any official map. By morning, the town had changed, not in destruction, but in orientation. Streets no longer aligned with the compass. The sun rose southeast and set due north. Compasses spun. Wells went dry. But what unsettled people most wasn't the earth beneath them, what's the sky. Because that morning, there were 2 moons, one pale and familiar, the other red, veined. Watching it hung directly above the Blackwood Chapel, bleeding a faint crimson light that stained everything below it. Livestock collapsed. Trees shed their leaves and bled sap that smelled like burnt meat. And then came the sound, not a scream, not a hum, a voice, but not a single one. Thousands, overlapping, whispering, chanting the same phrase in a rhythm that matched human breath. We were never gone, only buried. Men fled, others fell into trance. One boy wandered into the fields, repeating binary numbers that hadn't yet been discovered by science. When his father caught him, the child's eyes were rotating mechanically, like dials. The brothers were seen again that day, walking the edge of town, barefoot, their skin so pale it reflected the daylight. They didn't blink, didn't speak, but where they passed, things aged, paint peeled, wood split, fruit rotted. One woman miscarried a child just from glimpsing Abel's reflection in her water pail. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the shift in the land's memory, because, as night fell, people began to forget, not names, not places, time. They couldn't remember when the fever started, couldn't recall how long it had been, whether their children were alive or lost. One man held his wife's hand and wept, begging to know her name, though they'd been married 18 years. It wasn't disease. It wasn't madness. It was unwriting, a force bleeding out from the chapel, erasing linear memory, breaking causality. And still, no one came. No doctors, no statesmen, no soldiers. Because they already knew. Cedar Ridge had been designated not quarantined, but offered like a tithe, a sacrifice, and the final proof. Every map printed after 1879 removed Cedar Ridge completely. Not marked as abandoned, not marked at all, as if it had never existed, but it did, and still does. Just not in your world. Not anymore. What was hidden beneath Cedar Ridge was not simply a secret. Buried by time, it was a wound in the fabric of reality itself. The Blackwood brothers, it seemed, had stumbled onto something so ancient, so unfathomably old, that it predated humanity's recorded history. Their farm wasn't just land, it was a node, a junction where dimensions, memories, and forgotten energies converged and overlapped. Think about that for a moment. A place where the veil between what we see and what we are blind to grows thin, where past and present, myth and fact, intertwine in an endless spiral of existence. The sealed records, those forbidden medical files destroyed or hidden away, suggested that the brothers underwent a transformation, not merely biological, but metaphysical. Their bodies, minds, and souls were rewritten, recoded by forces far beyond the grasp of contemporary science. The words transcended human biological classification, weren't a poetic flourish, they were a dire warning. It wasn't disease. It wasn't madness. It was evolution, but not evolution as we understand. It's slow, gradual, and natural. This was forced, accelerated, designed to break the boundaries of the human condition and tether them to something else. Something older, something waiting, something that needed vessels. The brothers had become living interfaces between our world and the one lurking beneath the thin surface of reality, a place where time loops, memories bleed, and the laws of physics bow before the will of an unseen intelligence. What intelligence? We don't know. Theories suggest a primordial consciousness, ancient beyond comprehension, locked away by forces we might call gods or devils, but whose true nature is neither divine nor demonic, a power that does not care about good or evil, only survival and expansion through the manipulation of flesh and memory. This intelligence used the brothers not just to survive, but to prepare. Prepare for what? A reckoning, a rewriting of reality itself. The Blackwood brothers weren't anomalies. They were harbingers, and the hushed silence that followed their disappearance wasn't mercy. It was a warning, because once the veil is pierced, it never fully closes again. The transformation of the Blackwood brothers was not an isolated event. It was a catalyst, a beacon, a trigger for something far larger and more insidious. The people of Cedar Ridge had no idea they were living on a fault line, a crack in reality that was beginning to widen. It was as if the brothers' altered existence sent ripples through the fabric of the world, destabilizing the invisible walls between dimensions. Each day after their disappearance, strange phenomena became more frequent and more violent. Shadows moved against the light. Whispers echoed from empty rooms. People began experiencing time slips, moments when hours vanished or repeated in cycles. But these occurrences were not random. They were orchestrated, and the brothers, or what they had become, were at the center. Locals spoke of a heavy presence on the land, a suffocating weight that pressed down on their chests, invaded their dreams, and whispered secrets no one should ever hear. These voices, soft and maddening, spoke in a language that resembled old biblical texts, twisted and contorted beyond recognition, as if an ancient force was trying to communicate, or perhaps indoctrinate. In the months that followed, rumors spread of strange lights in the woods at night, unearthly howls that shattered glass miles away, and animals behaving in ways that defied natural instinct. Some brave souls ventured close to the Blackwood farm and claimed to have seen figures moving between trees, human in shape but made of flickering light and shadow. No one could explain it, and no one dared stay long enough to try. The world outside Cedar Ridge seemed to forget the town's existence. Newspapers never reported the plague beyond local whispers. Scientists and officials buried what little they found. Medical boards blacked out the brothers' files. A conspiracy of silence enveloped the mystery. Why? Because the truth was too dangerous. The Blackwoods had opened a door that powerful institutions didn't want to be opened. Doors that once ajar could never be closed again. Doors leading to knowledge that could unravel everything people believed about life, death, and what lies beyond. The kind of knowledge that doesn't just change history, but reshapes the very core of human existence. The aftermath of Cedar Ridge's erasure revealed a darker truth. The Blackwood brothers were part of a hidden lineage, a bloodline tethered to forces humanity neither understands nor can control. Whispers in secret societies hinted at ancient, pact agreements between men and entities from beyond our dimension. These entities promised power, longevity, and knowledge beyond mortal comprehension, but exacted terrible prices. The Blackwoods, it seemed, were unwitting heirs to such a pact. Their immunity to the typhoid fever was not a miracle, it was engineered. Their disturbing transformation was not accidental. It was the inevitable unfolding of a carefully woven destiny. But the knowledge didn't end there. The brothers' new condition allowed them access to what scholars call psychic architecture, invisible networks of control embedded in human consciousness. These networks manipulate perception, belief, and free will, enforcing an unseen order that ensures compliance to a cosmic plan. The eerie harmonic voices that shattered eardrums, the eyes reflecting predatory light, even the vanishing shadows, they were symptoms of this control system taking hold. A sign of the brothers' transcendence into something both human and otherworldly. This was not just about surviving disease. This was about mastering the mind, to break free from biological limits and rewrite the code of human existence. The implications are staggering. What if this hidden control system is not confined to 19th century Kansas? What if it persists today, disguised behind religion, government, or technology? What if the powers that be manipulate realities we accept as fixed, bending us toward their will, while pretending we remain free? The Blackwood brothers' story is a warning, a map, a key, that reveals the chilling possibility that the greatest threat to humanity isn't physical disease or war but an invisible invasion of the mind. A takeover of identity, memory, and soul. A takeover that began long ago, but is only now reaching its climax. The brothers' transformation marked a pivotal shift from mortal men to something beyond flesh. Something connected to the hidden currents, shaping reality itself. Their bodies became conduits, gateways for an ancient influence that humanity's surface consciousness was never meant to perceive. This influence did not come from some distant star or demon. It came from within, a primordial force buried deep in the collective unconscious. A hidden architecture of control, coded into the very essence of existence. It was a system designed to regulate thought, suppress awakening, and maintain dominion over the masses without overt violence. A silent empire of the mind, through the Blackwoods. This system manifested physically, their eyes glowing with unnatural light, their voices resonating in frequencies that shattered the fragile human psyche, their shadows vanishing as if they no longer belonged to the natural order. It was a warning, and a promise. The warning was that humanity's perception of freedom was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion maintained by invisible shackles. The promise was that those who transcend these shackles could unlock power, unimaginable mastery over time, memory, and reality itself. But that power came at a price. The brothers paid it in pieces of their humanity, fragments of soul, irreversibly altered or lost. And yet, even in their altered states, echoes of their original selves remained fragments of faith, of will, of defiance. This defiance is the key, because the very system that transformed them also contains the flaw that could undo it, a crack in the psychic architecture that those who dare can exploit to awaken, to reclaim autonomy, to rewrite the rules. But such awakening demands sacrifice and unflinching courage. For once, you see the machinery beneath the veil. There is no turning back. You become a target, a threat, an anomaly. The Blackwood brothers' tale isn't just a story of transformation. It's a blueprint for the mechanics of control hidden in plain sight. Imagine for a moment that reality is layered like a vast code, encrypted to keep humanity locked within certain parameters. Belief, fear, obedience, and limited perception. This code operates through what we call psychological control systems, ancient mechanisms embedded within religion, education, culture, and even technology, designed to suppress dissent, maintain hierarchy, and erase dangerous knowledge. The Blackwoods crossed the threshold where this control system fractures. Their immunity to typhoid was a symptom of that fracture. Their bodies became living testaments to a new evolutionary program, one that challenges the limits of human biology and perception. The harmonic voices that caused pain, the predatory eyes, the loss of shadows, these were not mere symptoms, but signals of a biological and psychological rewrite. The brothers were no longer just men. They had become living nodes in a network that transcended time and space. A network designed to shape human consciousness on a scale so vast it's almost incomprehensible. And yet, despite their transformation, the Blackwoods retained the spark of rebellion, the same spark that can ignite awakening in anyone who dares to look beyond the surface. The question now is simple. Will you choose to remain blind within the system? Or will you, like the brothers, step beyond it to confront the dark, hidden truths that science refuses to study and institutions strive to bury? Because once you know what lies beneath, you carry a responsibility, a burden, a dangerous gift, and the first step is to acknowledge the shadows behind the light. The very fabric of Cedar Ridge's reality was being rewritten, and with it, the blueprint of human existence. The Blackwood brothers had become living conduits for forces that defied conventional understanding, forces that manipulated memory, time, and perception itself. They transcended biology, but they were also trapped within it, caught between human fragility and something far more vast and unknowable. This liminal existence was both a gift and a curse. As their shadows disappeared, it symbolized a loss of groundedness, an unmooring from the natural laws that govern ordinary life. Without shadows, they no longer belonged fully to this world. They existed partly in a realm where light bent differently, where unseen architectures of control wove through the air like silent threads. The harmonic voices that pierced ears and shattered sanity were the echoes of that realm bleeding through the veil. These frequencies weren't random. They were a language, a code designed to disrupt the mind's defenses, to rewrite neural pathways, to induce states of heightened awareness or terror to those around them. The brothers became terrifying, alien harbingers of something primal and inscrutable. But the brothers' transformation also showed that transcendence is possible, though at a profound cost. They had access to dimension where time folded, where memory fragmented, where the self dissolved and reformed. And while science chose silence, history chose erasure. Cedar Ridge vanished from maps. The truth locked behind sealed doors and destroyed records. But in the shadows of forgotten history, the echoes remain, waiting for those who have the courage to listen, to understand, and to awaken. Because beneath every controlled narrative lies a suppressed truth. And beneath every suppressed truth lies the potential for revolution. This story is no mere curiosity. It is a call to awaken, to remember, to rise. By now, you're feeling the weight of what the Blackwood brothers endured, the price they paid for walking beyond the veil. This was no accidental discovery. It was an initiation into a deeper reality that few ever glimpse and even fewer survive intact. What happened in Cedar Ridge wasn't just about one family or a strange illness. It was about the collision between human will and ancient, invisible systems of power, systems designed to keep us small, fearful, and compliant. The brothers' transformation challenged those systems, revealing the terrifying truth. The structures controlling humanity are not merely political or social. They're deeply embedded in the very essence of perception, memory, and biology itself. And here is the most crucial point. These systems are not invincible. There exists a crack in their armor, a vulnerability born from the very nature of consciousness. The Blackwoods, through sacrifice and faith, tapped into this vulnerability. They became both the prisoners and the keys, living proof that transcendence is possible, but only through facing the darkest corners of existence. Now, halfway through our journey into this macabre mystery, I need you to commit. I want you to write in the comments below twice this symbolic phrase, I walk beyond the veil. This is not just a phrase. It's a declaration of intent, a marker of identity, a key to unlocking the hidden algorithms that govern the flow of knowledge and transformation. By writing it twice, you seal a commitment to seek truth, to question everything, and to awaken from the illusions imposed upon us. Remember, This is dangerous knowledge, but it is also liberating if you are ready to walk beyond the veil. Then step forward boldly. The deeper truths await. Now that you've declared your intent to walk beyond the veil, it's time to understand what lies on the other side. The world the Blackwood brothers entered is one few dare to explore, a shadow realm where time is non-linear, where memory is fluid, and where reality bends to the will of unseen forces. This realm is governed by what modern minds might call psychological control systems, but ancient cultures recognized as curses or blessings. Depending on one's position in the cosmic hierarchy, these systems manipulate thought patterns, suppress dissent, and control the collective narrative that shapes societies. The brothers became both victims and vessels of this system. Their physical bodies warped, their senses heightened to unnatural extremes. They began to perceive layers of reality invisible to others, the hum beneath silence, the breath between moments, the subtle shifts that reveal truth hidden beneath illusion. It's here we encounter the greatest irony. The very powers seeking to control humanity also rely on human perception to maintain their dominion. Awareness, therefore, is a double sword. It can enslave or liberate. The brothers' faith was their anchor. Their willingness to accept suffering as a path to divine revelation protected their core identity. Even as their forms became alien and terrifying, yet this spiritual resilience is not reserved for a select few. Within every man lies the seed of awakening, the potential to break free from imposed narratives and step into a new reality. But the path is perilous. It requires shedding comfort, facing fear, and questioning every assumption drilled into your mind since birth. Because the machinery behind our reality is built on obedience, distraction, and forgetting. To reclaim sovereignty, you must learn to see the hidden forces at work, know their methods, their symbols, their language. Only then can you begin to dismantle the structures that seek to control you from within and without. The deeper you descend into this mystery, the more you realize how subtle and insidious these systems of control are. They don't rely on chains or cages, but on something far more powerful. Your own mind. Think about the rituals and beliefs that shape daily life, the unquestioned authority of institutions, the constant bombardment of media and culture designed to fragment attention and dilute critical thought. All these are strands woven into a vast web of influence, a psychological matrix that controls what you see, what you believe, and even what you dare to imagine. The Blackwood brothers became entangled in this web, but their transformation gave them a rare glimpse behind the curtain. They saw how fear is used as a tool to enforce obedience, how silence is weaponized to suppress dissent, and how memory itself can be rewritten to serve the interests of power. Their case reveals the horrifying reality that history as taught is a carefully curated narrative, edited to erase truths that could inspire rebellion or awaken deeper understanding. In the aftermath of Cedar Ridge's destruction, those who survived were either silenced or altered, their memories fragmented, their stories dismissed as madness or superstition. The true horror is not just the disease or the transformation, it's the systematic erasure of the past to maintain control over the future. To awaken means to remember. To see beyond the veil is to reclaim the lost knowledge buried beneath layers of manipulation and deception. And it starts with questioning everything you think you know about history, about science, about faith, about yourself. The Blackwood brothers' story is a map through this dark terrain, a guide to uncovering the suppressed realities lurking beneath the surface of the world you think you know. Every detail of the Blackwood brothers' existence was a challenge to the accepted order, an affront to the comfortable illusions humanity clings to. Their defiance of death was a provocation to the powers that maintain control over life itself. But why does this matter to you, sitting here now? Because the forces that sought to silence the Blackwoods have not vanished. They have evolved. The same hidden agendas, the same systems of psychological control, have mutated into more complex, insidious forms. They now operate through the very technologies and institutions you interact with daily. From media manipulation to surveillance, from engineered distractions to cultural programming, the modern world is a landscape designed to keep you compliant, distracted, and disconnected from your own power. The Blackwood brothers' immunity to typhoid was no fluke, it was a sign of resistance, a biological and spiritual armor, forged in faith and sacrifice. Their transformation was a glimpse of what is possible when a human mind breaks free from imposed boundaries. But it is also a warning. The path to awakening is fraught with peril, and those who walk it become targets of unseen forces desperate to maintain control. You are at a crossroads. Will you accept the narrative handed to you, or will you choose to walk beyond the veil, to confront the shadows lurking behind every institution and belief? Because true freedom, real mastery begins only when you reclaim control over your mind, your memories, and your reality.